I love foldable phones. I've been using a Galaxy Fold since the second model for a little bit, and mainly as my main driver for Model 3 and 4. So I have a huge appreciation for folding devices. But the one thing I'm finally happy is happening in the States is a competitor for against the Samsung, and that is the Google Pixel Fold. Let's talk about it. So let's just start with specs to start with. It has a Tensor G2 processor, the same as the Pixel 7 Pro. The external screen is 120 Hz refresh rate with a 5.8-inch screen, which is way bigger than some of the other folding phones in the States. It feels way more like a normal size phone, even though of course it's shorter than a normal phone. It's got that normal width that you would assume for a slab type smartphone. The internal screen is also 120 Hz with a 7.6-inch screen. The battery life is a 4800 milliamp battery, which is a little bit bigger than the RAM is 12 gig, and you have an option of 256 or 512 of storage space for this, running at UFS 3.1. So those are the specs rattled off real quick. Why did I not take a lot of time this time on the specs? Well, essentially the Google Fold is almost exactly like a Pixel 7 Pro in the specs department. I have noticed, I think because of that additional RAM, that the Fold has quite a bit of performance difference per the 7 Pro versus the Fold. I just feel like the G2 must work in companionship with a lot more RAM better than its 8 gig counterpart on the 7 Pro. Cameras of course are different, and that is a big talking point. There is definitely some different cameras on this Pixel than the other Pixels, and it's not similar to the Pixel 7a cameras. But regardless, beyond the specs, well, this is Gen 1, it's going to break. How is Google support? Some of that is merited. We don't know how great Google is going to be about returns or replacements if the phone gets damaged. It will. It's a folding phone. They're not as durable, but in my testing so far, I've had zero issues with it. No cracking or wear that I feel on the screen when bending it open at the hinge. Honestly, the ending the hinge at 178 degrees and not fully unfolded, I think is actually a smart move to protect that hinge and the screens. You can still lay it flat beyond that point with just a little bit more pressure, but it, in my opinion, is a smart move as well because it helps protect and increase the longevity of the screen opening and closing. So some believe this is a nitpick as well. I think it was a good design option. And then of course, most importantly, is how thin it is. How thin this device is. It literally feels like carrying a passport. Sure, a little bit heavier than a passport, but the size feels like a passport. I truly do believe that this is a better hinge, primarily because there is no gap here. That doesn't seem like that big of a deal, and I know Samsung with the version 5 coming out is supposed to be doing a lot with that. But right now, comparing between 4 and Pixel Fold first generation, having that no gap just for the sense of comfort of not worrying about things getting in the phone when it's closed, very small gap, but it's a lot less likely than what it is on the Samsung. And there have been a lot of reports about just dust particles or sand or something else getting in the phone's crease when it's closed and then eventually scratching or causing damage to the internal screen. I don't feel that concern near as much with the Pixel Fold. And I could honestly go on and on about just the durability of this. We're talking about this being a Gen 1. Do we not remember how Gen 1 was on the Samsung Galaxy Fold? Sure, they were the first to market. Google could have had theirs out a couple years ago, but that's what we've been waiting on. They've been perfecting this, trying to figure out which solution, which aspect ratios, how they want to go with the hinge, and I think they did well taking their time. So if we want to really nitpick, we're really going to have to find a lot in the very details that needs to be improved. It is Gen 1, and we'll go over that as well, because there are some things that can definitely improve. But as far as a Gen 1 phone, especially in the folding market that's hard to get into, and it's not as many consumers are getting folding phones yet, it's not near as popular as your slab phone, Google did a very good job, and we need to be happy that there is some competition, especially in the States, against Samsung. Beyond the fit and finish of the device, the external screen is much more usable. I myself was a fan of the thinner, narrow screen on the Z Fold and use it quite often without opening the phone still. A lot of people aren't, and they barely use the external screen when using only the internal screen. I'm a little bit different. I still do use quite a bit of the stuff on the external screen. The one-hand reachability was nice with this, and I think even if it was just a smidge wider, it would definitely improve things quite a bit. But those keyboards, even if you go into keyboard customization and make the keyboard bigger, taking up more screen, you still feel cramped in some situations. I myself have personally gotten used to it. I use the glide a lot instead of literally typing, but when I have a phone that's pretty much the width of any other slab phone, it is way more comfortable to what we've been used to for years with slab phones now. The internal screen, like I mentioned in the specs, is a 7.6-inch screen. That's almost identical to the Samsung variant. It's just the aspect ratio is different because of this being more of a landscape type device. Because it's already in this wider aspect ratio for the front, it lays it into a more landscape orientation. Personally, myself, I think this is another good benefit because once you go to multitasking, you truly feel more like you have two full-size apps side by side. It really honestly reminds me a lot of the Microsoft Duo, and just having the landscape really orient to two sides of the phone without that crease or that gap in the middle like the Duo has. It really feels like a Duo in some situations. Now, of course, Samsung has a little bit of an up here on the competition with One UI and their multitasking abilities. Google's is definitely way more stock and way more limited, where Samsung can do 3 apps, and I honestly was one that quite often did that. I know a lot of time with most users it's just a side-by-side app, but I did quite often use 3 apps. There is a way, if you're interested, check out that short. It will show you how to get 3 apps running, but even still, it's not as fluid as Samsung's OS or One UI over Android for multitasking on the bigger screens. And these are things that I hope Google does improve with, is just the OS with folding phones. To the limitation even on the external front screen not being different from the internal screens. I do like Google's approach. I like that it's something different, but on the other hand, my personal preference still is for Samsung's display screen to have a completely different wallpaper, app layout, etc. versus what is on the internal screen once I flip it open. But to some, they may like the second screen that you would swipe over to when your phone's closed being the second screen on the internal display once you fold it open. So there's things like that that I think Google will be improving over time with either pixel drops or large OS updates like Android 14, which I'll definitely be covering Android 14 more. But on to the cameras. This is a very interesting area because both these phones are very thin, so we can't pack as large of a lens in these devices. Everything is so tight, and that's why the batteries aren't as great as well, because they're so thin. And this one exceptionally is the case because it's quite a bit thinner than the Z Fold. So they're not the Pixel Pros, and they're really not the Pixel 7a lenses. They're actually another set of different lenses Google's using in this phone that are basically in between both the best and the budget-friendly cameras. So what you have is a 48 megapixel, a 10.8 ultra wide, and a 10.8 telephoto. that does have 5x zoom compared to 3x zoom on the Samsung. Of course, those aren't the only cameras. These folding phones fold out like this, not the flip, but the folding phones have a lot of cameras everywhere, and there's also a camera on the inside. What's different about this one? Remember those bezels that everybody's complaining about? That's another feature of the bezels being used. Instead of it trying to be an underscreen camera, which, I mean, the concept is really cool. You can't see it after you get used to it at all, but it's just not good quality camera. That tech will eventually get there, of course, but right now it is a 9 megapixel internal camera, and it's in the bezel, and it's much better to be used for your web conferences or some meeting you may be having that you want the display open on. And then lastly is the selfie on the front. The selfie on the front is a 9.8 megapixel camera. So it's considerably better than, you know, even though the numbers are the same, probably a lot of Google AI going into the fact here, but the front is a lot better for selfies as well. So in comparisons of the photo quality, as we've seen in some of the pictures I've shown when talking about the cameras, a lot of times it is quite similar in the quality of it. I was hoping for a much bigger difference just because of being the Pixel, and the Pixel's brand of cameras are so great, especially for several years before the competition started catching up. But there is still a marginal difference. I do feel like the Pixel is slightly still better, especially with natural skin tones. Having the Pixel around now and comparing with the Galaxy, I can tell that the Galaxy a lot of times does warmer skin tones than the Pixel does. Pixel does very good at making everything more natural. I do feel that the video on the Samsung is a little bit better as far as the features, the modes, etc. All the way to the quality, I feel is a little bit better. But this could change with Pixel updates, honestly. So I know it feels like I've been bashing the Z Fold at this point, like, get it out of here. There's only one champion. But like a lot of arguments are saying, there's years of experience that Samsung has in this, and there are things that they are doing better than Google. Like I said earlier, the OS modifications that they've done with One UI, I think are better than most of the features you get on the Pixel side. Obviously the Pixel drop stuff, I'm counting that separate. Auto answering services, the on-hold services, the spam calling, all those features that Pixel offers across all Pixel phones are fantastic, honestly. And that's why I personally love Pixel phones. But as far as just the One UI versus Pixel stock Android modifications to how the folding phone works, Google still has work there to do. And here's a hot take that I want to discuss versus the Pixel versus the Z on how they're handling apps. So if we notice when we open the phone, some apps, like let's take Instagram on the Z Fold, have an option for you to expand the aspect ratio to the full screen, which essentially just stretches the app because the app manufacturer, the developer, hasn't really made their apps supported. Instagram's really bad about this, where Google didn't really do anything about that. And if we really think about that and stop complaining Google about not doing that, I honestly think that's a good initiative not to, and just having these big black bars on either side that then the user has to set one off to the left side of the orientation and then bring up a second app on the second side of the screen. With doing so, it actually, in my opinion, forces developers to really work on their apps and make them and utilize them for this new multi-screens, multi-form factors, and really take Android as a great ecosystem for apps, as not a secondary stepchild to the other OS that gets all the treatment of the good apps and the good landscape of how the maneuverability between the apps are. So personally myself, as being somebody that works in the technology industry, I feel that this actually is a good move by Google because it actually forces the developers of those apps to take notice a little bit more about how their app is acting on a folding device with these large black bars that users will just primarily complain about is something with that app. Why hasn't somebody updated this app for and having better support in these type of phones? So I feel like that's actually a very good move by Google. So I'd really be interested in knowing your input below in the comments if you feel the same way I do, or if you are totally against that and you would rather the manufacturer of the device build something extra into Android to support that instead of waiting on developers. I think personally developers should be held more accountable than they are currently on Android. And a couple things I don't really notice a large difference on. The fingerprint readers on both are great. I will nitpick Google here as I do not like the placement of the power and volume buttons. At the very least, Google, you should have made some different texture. I had problems for like 2 weeks at least when I first got on this phone of accidentally hitting the power button when I thought that was the volume button, because Samsung's are in different locations, and even Samsung's power button is recessed in, so you at least have that tactile feel of a difference. Google doesn't have any of that. The buttons literally feel exactly the same. The other thing that I don't see much of a difference is battery life. These folding phones with their multiple displays take a lot of battery. So, I mean, you're getting 6 to 7 hours on screen time. I haven't really honestly seen much of a difference with the Pixel. I do feel like Pixel may have, strangely enough, a little bit better with battery saver options than Samsung. I always thought Samsung had great battery saver options, but I actually feel like when the battery saver options are enabled on the Pixel, it may work just slightly better. Finally have a good competitor where honestly I think Samsung has been getting a little stagnant the last couple years and just doing iterative changes. I'm hoping there's quite some big ones on the horizon. If not this year, probably next year for sure. But I feel like the biggest thing that is good for everyone is having that competition and bringing other manufacturers to the folding genre. There are definitely things that Samsung does better, from the multitasking to UI and their extra just features on top of Android for every little thing you need, to an S Pen, to the even desktop mode for DeX. These are all very specific features, but it just gives this very high price tag of, you know, $1,400 to $1,800 plus phones that we're in with these folding phones, even more incentive to have them, more little use case scenarios to why these phones are beneficial to have over just a standard phone. I don't see that a lot yet with the Pixel Fold. The Pixel experience is very smooth and nice. I haven't had heating issues like several claim when gaming or doing anything else on it. Really no performance issues. Sure, the Snapdragon is a better processor, but overall, I haven't seen any issues with the G2 processor. I really haven't ever on any of the newer Pixel phones. But Samsung having that experience and those cases to just make the phone even useful in all these other different situations does make the overall package for the Samsung Z Fold better. But I think it really comes down to one specific scenario that makes it the biggest deal breaker between the two. I think the biggest factor is the cover screens, because the narrow form factor of the Samsung makes you rely more on the internal screen for most use case scenarios, where it's vice versa on the Pixel Fold, where you're using the external screen like your normal phone, and then you're opening it to use that larger screen for multimedia, for multiple apps, etc. So I think you're probably safe on durability of it. Always with these types of phones, get a fairly heavy duty case like Spigen, Google's case. This nice form factor rubbery type case that comes directly from Google is even great. I really like it. Just get some case on these phones. They're so expensive. Get the warranty on them. You need every little extra thing because this form factor is still new to the market. They're not as durable as your slab phones, but overall I don't think you have anything to worry about if you go with the Pixel Fold over a Galaxy Fold. I covered a lot. If you have any other questions on things I didn't cover, leave it in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.